economics 111. We're going to combine aggregate demand and aggregate supply on one graph, and the intersection will provide us with the equilibrium, an actual level of equilibrium, which will be comparing to the full employment level of equilibrium, which is our goal. Eventually, you don't move from one equilibrium to another equilibrium directly. A shift is going to happen, which will take us out of equilibrium. Then, the self-interest, market forces, will drive both aggregate demand and aggregate supply to a new equilibrium, one along the new curve and one along the older existing curve. We'll discuss those forces that return us to equilibrium or disequilibrium in a later lesson. So there are four scenarios that can happen in this model that we're going to discuss right now. We start at full employment. Aggregate demand, aggregate supply. That's a short-run aggregate supply curve. This is gross domestic product real. This is price level. GDP full employment is found in the middle of the intermediate range. It's going to be met with some amount of inflation. If there's a shift in aggregate demand, if there's an increase, we're going to get a higher level of output. Call that sub I for inflationary. Price level sub I for inflationary. We get more output but a higher rate of inflation. Alright. Now, what would cause this shift? Well, for consumptions, a change in wealth. The stock market has gone up. People feel they don't have to save as much, so they can consume more out of current income. Indebtedness, interest rates may have fallen, causing an increase in borrowing for durable goods. Taxes may have decreased, and the expectations about future income or prices have caused consumers to buy more in the short run. IG, it could be because of an increase in underlying business profitability. G is autonomous. There's just an increase in government spending, not explainable by economics. XN could have increased because of a weakening of the dollar. So foreign countries buy more of our exports because the weakening of the dollar means their currency buys more of ours, or it could be caused by an increase in foreign income. If other countries are more prosperous, they'll buy more of their things, but they'll also buy more of our things. So we're going to go from this equilibrium to this equilibrium. We'll describe when we do that, what happens is you're at this disequilibrium here. This curve is shifted out. At this price level, you're over here. And something's going to happen to cause us to ride up this line to this new equilibrium. And what those are, we'll discuss at a later lesson. This scenario, where you're getting higher price levels and associated with higher output, is referred to as demand pull inflation, because it's caused by an increase in aggregate demand. Inflationary impact of the aggregate demand depends upon the new location. Notice that if the shift in aggregate demand happens in the horizontal range, there'll be no change in the price level because there's so many unused resources that an increase in output can be accomplished without any changes in productivity, because there are so many skilled, unhired workers that the firm can hire equally qualified workers to produce the output. No change in productivity, no change in the price level, but you'll get more output. In the intermediate range, you'll get a increase in output with an increase in the rate of inflation. If the shift in aggregate demand happens in the vertical range, you'll get no change in output, but you'll get a change in inflation. This is full capacity. Decreases in aggregate demand associated with recession and higher levels of unemployment. So what's happening here is we can start again at full employment. Short run average supply, average demand, full employment in the middle of the intermediate range. Gross domestic product real, don't forget they are. Price level, resulting output, full employment, resulting rate of inflation. If aggregate demand shifts to the right, this will be the resulting level of GDP. We're going to call that R for recession. This would be the resulting price level. Okay. What you're seeing here is a decrease in consumption because of wealth, indebtedness, taxes, expectations. The stock market has fallen. People are saving more out of their current income in order to make up for the reduced purchasing power of their investments. So they're saving more and consuming less. Indebtedness has fallen, perhaps because of an increase in price level, an increase in interest rates. Taxes have gone up, or expectations about the future have dimmed, causing people to consume less at any given level of income. It could be because of a decrease in underlying business profitability. For some reason not explainable in economics, government spending has fallen. XN. It could be that foreign income has gone down. Other countries may be experiencing recessions. They're buying less of their output as well as less of our exports. And it could be that exchange rates, the dollar has strengthened. That means we'll buy more imports because our dollar buys more of their currency. But it means that our currency is more expensive to them and they'll buy less of our exports. And so XN will fall. If we are in the horizontal, if we fall from the intermediate range, the horizontal range, price level will fall and output will fall. Other scenarios like these associated, so this is associated with a recession or a depression. Other decreases in aggregate demand in other areas of the average supply curve. If aggregate demand decreases in the intermediate range, there will be a decrease in the rate of inflation. Output will not change. If the new equilibriums are both in the intermediate range, there'll be a decrease in the price level and a decrease in real GDP. And if it falls from the intermediate range into the horizontal range, there'll be a decrease in price level and a decrease in GDP. This is recessionary. Now, although our model predicts this lower level of inflation, often empirically, in other words, when we study historical periods of recession, the price level does not decline. Our model predicts it, but we don't see it. When we see aggregate demand increase, our model predicts higher rates of inflation, and we see it. But not so when the economy slides into recession often. There's a name for that, called sticky down. Prices are sticky down because wages are sticky down. Since wages are sticky down, there are no decreases in costs to pass along to consumers in the form of lower prices, or reduced amount of inflation, or even deflation. At one time, wages and costs would go down during a recession, and during a recession you would have deflation. But because of structural changes in the economy, we don't see that anymore. This is an important break with classical economics and is one of the linchpins of Keynesian economics. Why are prices sticky down? In part because wages are sticky down. During the period of classical economics, wages were flexible down. During a recession, workers' pays were cut. But now, today, more workers have contracts with their employers. Regardless of what's happening with the employer's sales, the employer is required to pay workers the same rate stipulated in the contract, so wages will not be flexible down. The impact that pay cuts would have on morale, even if a business could cut workers' pay, they often won't, because if you cut workers' pay, morale will go down. An unhappy worker will be less productive. A reduced level of productivity will cause average costs to rise, and the whole point of decreasing wages was to get more output per dollar out of the worker. But if the worker is less productive because you cut his pay and destroy his morale, that won't work. Wages can't go down for minimum wage workers because it's stipulated by law. Menu costs. Menu costs are another reason that wages and prices are sticky down. Menu costs are a metaphor, and it has to do with the idea that pricing a good can often be a complex decision. So there are many departments involved, and you have to have all of them operate and coordinate to increase a price. So if a business thinks a downturn in the economy is temporary, they won't bother to incur the cost of changing price level. So for example, if a steel company, for example, has to reduce output and it wants to lower its costs, it has to coordinate that with marketing, production, accounting departments, and it can take a while and an actual expense to actually determine how much they should reduce costs. So if the output decline is going to be temporary, you won't see wages decline and prices as a result decline. Price wars. If Coke reduced its prices during a time of recession, it could produce a price war with Pepsi. And then Pepsi would cut its prices below Coke's, and Coke's could reduce its prices below Pepsi's. So sometimes when there's not sufficient competition in an industry, you won't see prices decline as our model predicts because of the fear of price wars. So sticky down. Wage contracts. Wages are inflexible down. No downward flexibility in wages. No downward flexibility in prices. Lower wages, even if possible, would reduce morale, which would then reduce worker motivation, reduce productivity. There would be no cost savings to pass along in the form of lower prices. Businesses cannot reduce their wages below minimum wage. No wage reduction, no cost reduction, no reduction in prices in a recession. Menu costs. Output declines may be temporary, so businesses may hold off on incurring the cost of repricing their goods. So no price decline in a time of recession. Price wars. If there's insufficient competition, a business that even is capable of reducing its prices may not because it fears retaliation by competing firms. Alright. That is recessionary. Now we can talk about another equilibrium, which is cost push inflation. This is also known as stagflation. A recession with inflation, which had never happened. They had to create a new model for this. This puts an end to the Keynesian model, where in times of growth there is inflation matching increase in workers' pay for no net change in real income or price level. Where in a recessionary period in the Keynesian model, or the aggregate expense model as it is also known, there would be less output but less income. Prices would go down, but there would be no change in real income as a result. In this model, output, income, and price level are free to change independently of each other. So let's do cost push inflation, also known as a supply shock. GDP, real, price level, short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, full employment. If business costs go up, underlying business profitability falls. An increase in taxes on businesses, an increase in regulations, an increase in resource prices, things that we talked about before that cause an aggregate supply curve to shift. This would cause aggregate supply to shift to the left. That's a decrease. Don't think up and down. Notice how the resulting equilibriums are moving to the left to lower levels of GDP. GDP full employment, GDP cost push. Price level, cost push, price level, full employment. Although this is in the middle of the aggregate supply curve, this is not considered full employment. This is a cost push recession where you're experiencing higher levels of inflation, lower levels of output, and higher levels of unemployment. All three variables are worse in this scenario. This is the scenario that the aggregate expense model could not explain. The Operating expense model cannot explain a recession with inflation, if you recall. So, increases in the price and factors of cost of production will cause prices to rise as businesses pass the increased costs along to consumers in the form of higher prices. But that will be matched also with the average supply curve shifting to the left with a decrease in output as a result of the new equilibrium on the new average supply curve. The last scenario that we want to talk about with results of equilibriums, with respect to equilibriums, is growth. Alright, over your lifetime you may have noticed that the number of people go up and aggregate demand is shifting out. What prevents more and more inflation? Well, it's the idea that the economy is growing also. Aggregate supply is shifting out to the right to match increases in aggregate demand. Aggregate demand shifts out, and we're growing the economy. This is the goal. We're getting increases in output, but no changes in the rate of inflation. We're growing the productive capacity of the country. Long-run average supply is growing also, and we're matching increases in aggregate demand. Full employment, price stability. This is typical of the late 80s through the 2000s, including the 2010s. Growth in aggregate supply was resulting from increased productivity because of increased use of technology, computers, internet, and time management, just-in-time inventory management. Shifts in average supply allow aggregate demand to increase without resulting demand pull inflation. Okay. Full employment also shifts to the right. So here's full employment originally, and the new aggregate demand, average supply curve will also result in full employment over the past 2 decades. That's the goal.